The sun rose quietly over the city, casting a golden glow through the tall glass windows of Reed Enterprises. Inside the top-floor office, everything looked perfect, clean, silent, and cold. The ticking of the clock was the only sound that dared to break the stillness. Behind a large glass desk sat Alexander Reed, the youngest and most powerful CEO in the city. His face was calm, almost emotionless. Every line of his expression spoke of control. People called him the Ice King. He had built his empire from nothing, brick by brick, deal by deal. But in the process, he had locked his heart behind invisible glass walls. The same way he surrounded his office with real ones. He never smiled. He never joked. And he never allowed anyone close enough to hurt him. Outside his door, assistants whispered nervously. Some said he had rejected more than 100 women who tried to win his attention. Famous models, elegant businesswomen, even daughters of rich politicians, none of them mattered. To him, romance was a distraction. Love was a weakness. And emotions were mistakes. At precisely 8 a.m., he lifted his head as his personal assistant, Martha, entered. Her steps were soft, her tone careful. "Good morning, sir. Your new security detail has arrived." Alexander looked up from his files. "Another one?" "Yes, sir. After last week's threat, the board insisted on someone experienced. She's waiting outside." He sighed quietly. "Fine, send her in." The door opened again, and Riley Hart walked in. She was not what he expected. No sharp suit, no cold expressions. She wore a simple black jacket and jeans. Her short hair framed a confident face, her eyes bright and calm, like someone who had seen storms and laughed through them. She walked with a quiet strength that didn't need to prove itself. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," she said with a light smile. "I'm Riley Hart. I'll be your new bodyguard." Alexander studied her, his sharp eyes scanning every detail. "You're different from the last one." Riley smirked. "If by different you mean I actually smile, then yes. Very different." Martha, standing by the door, looked shocked at her tone. No one ever spoke to Alexander Reed like that. But instead of anger, the CEO only raised an eyebrow, for the first time in years. He didn't immediately dismiss someone for their boldness. "Why do you think you're right for this job?" he asked, leaning back slightly. Riley shrugged lightly. "Because I don't scare easily. And because I'm not here to impress you, Mr. Reed. I'm here to protect you." Her voice was steady. There was no fear, no flattery, only confidence. Something unusual flickered behind Alexander's eyes, but he quickly hid it. "Fine, you'll start today." Martha nodded, then left the room quietly. Leaving the two alone, the silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. Riley glanced around the office, massive windows, steel decor, everything spotless. "This place looks like it hasn't seen a smile in years," she said softly. Alexander didn't respond, only glanced at her reflection in the glass. "Smiles don't build companies." She tilted her head. "Maybe not, but they help build people." He froze for half a second. The air felt different. The hum of the city below, the soft ticking of the clock, it all seemed slower. Warmer, somehow alive again. Riley smiled lightly. "I'll be outside, keeping an eye on things." As she walked out, her boots made a soft sound against the marble floor. Alexander's eyes followed her reflection in the glass wall until she disappeared. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he realized something strange. His heart had skipped a beat. He shook his head and returned to his laptop. "Unacceptable," he muttered to himself. "She's just another employee." But the day felt unusually long. Every sound reminded him of her footsteps in the hall, the faint echo of her laugh when she greeted the receptionist. He tried to focus on contracts and emails, but his mind kept drifting. At lunch, he looked up through the glass and saw her standing outside his office door, watching the corridor with alert eyes. She was calm, professional, but there was something about her presence that made the air feel lighter. Hours later, as the sun began to set, golden light painted his office walls. The reflections glimmered like fire across the glass. Riley knocked softly. "Long day, boss." "You should eat." He frowned slightly. "I'm fine." She leaned against the doorframe, casual as ever. "You always say that, don't you?" Her tone wasn't mocking, it was kind, almost caring. Alexander didn't answer. He only watched her walk away again when night finally fell, and the office lights dimmed. Alexander sat in silence. Outside, the city glowed. He caught his own reflection in the window, distant, tired. But in that reflection, he imagined another figure, Riley's faint smile beside him. For the first time in years, he wondered what it might feel like to lower the glass walls just a little. The clock ticked softly. Somewhere outside, Riley's calm voice spoke through her earpiece. "All clear, Mr. Reed. Good night." He closed his eyes, and the sound of her voice lingered soft, warm, and somehow comforting. And though he didn't say it aloud, a single thought crossed his mind. Maybe tomorrow won't be so cold. The next morning arrived with soft sunlight slipping through the glass walls of the CEO's office. The city outside was alive, cars honking faintly. The hum of distant chatter, but inside Reed Enterprises, everything was wrapped in the same quiet rhythm of discipline and routine. Alexander sat behind his desk, reviewing reports. His dark suit was perfectly pressed, his expression calm, but something about him felt slightly different today. There was a strange lightness in his chest, an echo of warmth he couldn't quite name. The faint sound of footsteps drew closer, steady, confident, almost musical. Without looking up, he knew who it was. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." Riley's voice came from the doorway, light and teasing. "Still hiding behind that desk like it's your armor?" He didn't look up, only replied in his usual calm tone. "It's called working, Miss Hart. Some of us do it." Riley chuckled, walking in. The sound of her boots against the marble floor filled the air like a slow beat. She set a paper cup on his desk. "Coffee? Black. No sugar." "I asked around apparently. That's how the Ice King takes it." He raised an eyebrow, finally meeting her gaze. "I didn't ask for coffee. You didn't have to," she said with a small smile. "You looked like you needed it." For a second, Alexander forgot what he was about to say. The morning sun lit her hair, and her easy smile seemed to melt the cold edges of his office. He quickly looked away and focused on his papers again. "You shouldn't assume what I need." Riley shrugged, her voice soft but playful. "Guess I'll learn." There was a pause. The quiet hum of the air conditioner filled the space between them. It wasn't an awkward silence, it was strangely alive. Like the room itself was holding its breath. After a moment, Riley glanced toward the city through the glass walls. "You ever open a window in here?" Alexander frowned slightly. "Windows don't open at this height." She grinned. "Figures. Even the air's scared of you?" He gave her a sharp look, but the corner of his lips twitched just a little. Riley caught it and smiled wider. "Was that a smile, Mr. Reed?" "I swear I just saw one." He coughed softly, pretending to check his watch. "You're very talkative for someone hired to stay alert." "Talking helps me stay alert," she replied, easily. "Silence makes me sleepy." Her words danced through the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. Alexander didn't know whether to feel annoyed or intrigued. There was something freeing about her presence, something unpredictable. Around noon, he had a meeting on the top floor with investors. Riley followed, her eyes scanning every corner, every movement. She was sharp, professional, but also different. She didn't act like an employee afraid of him. She moved beside him, not behind him. Her confidence steady, but not arrogant. When the meeting ended, She leaned against the elevator wall, glancing at him with a smirk. Do all your meetings sound like that? A bunch of people agreeing with you and pretending to understand. He turned his head slowly. They understand well enough. That's why they're still employed. She laughed softly, and you wonder why they look terrified every time you speak. He didn't respond, but the faintest curve appeared at the corner of his mouth again. Riley noticed. There it is again. I think you're warming up. The elevator doors opened. Alexander stepped out, saying quietly, "Don't get used to it." But as they walked side by side through the marble hallway, something about their pace matched perfectly her lightness and his quiet strength. Moving in unspoken rhythm, later that day. While reviewing security protocols, Riley sat across from him in his office. She leaned back casually, arms crossed. You've got 10 cameras covering one hallway. Overkill much? Alexander replied evenly. I prefer caution to chaos, she smiled. And I prefer life to perfection. Her words made him pause. He looked up, meeting her eye steady, fearless, and full of something he couldn't define. For a man used to numbers, plans, and precision, that look felt dangerously unpredictable. The hours slipped by quietly. The light outside changed from bright gold to soft orange as evening approached. Riley was still there, reviewing her notes, humming faintly under her breath. The melody was gentle, peaceful. Alexander found himself listening. The hum of her tune, the soft tapping of her pen, the faint clink of her coffee cup hit, all felt strangely comforting. Like a warmth he didn't know he missed. At one point, he spoke without thinking. You seem happy. Riley looked up, surprised. I am. Why wouldn't I be? He hesitated. You guard people for a living. Doesn't that ever feel heavy? She smiled gently. Sometimes. But I like knowing I can keep someone safe. Even if they never say thank you. There was a quiet heartbeat of silence. Then, softly, he said, Thank you. Her expression softened and her voice dropped to a whisper. You're welcome, Mr. Reed. Outside, the city lights flickered on. The glass walls reflected their figures, two silhouettes in the warm glow of the setting sun. For the first time, Sander didn't feel alone inside his glass fortress. Something about her laughter, her honesty, her warm fit broke through the cold space around him. When Riley finally stood to leave, she gave him a playful salute. Try not to freeze the staff tomorrow. He looked up from his desk. And you try not to talk so much during work. She grinned. No promises. As the door clicked softly behind her, Alexander leaned back in his chair. The faint echo of her laughter lingered like perfume in the air. He glanced at the untouched cup of coffee she brought earlier. It had gone cold, but somehow, his heart hadn't. He didn't realize it yet, but the woman he had hired for protection had already begun protecting something far more fragile, his lonely, hidden heart. The week moved slowly, yet something inside Alexander Reed's world began to change. His office still gleamed like a frozen palace quiet. Perfect, untouched, but it no longer felt empty. There was a new sound within those glass walls now. The low hum of laughter, the rustle of movement, the faint rhythm of boots crossing marble floors, and every sound belonged to Riley's heart. She was everywhere. Her presence filled the quiet corners like sunlight slipping through cracks. She didn't ask for permission to speak or smile. She simply did. And somehow, Alexander didn't stop her. That morning, he entered his office to find her leaning casually against the window, watching the sunrise paint the city gold. You're early, he said, his voice calm but softer than usual. Riley turned with a grin. You too, boss? Couldn't sleep? He sat behind his desk, adjusting his tie. Work never sleeps. She crossed her arms. You say that like it's a good thing. He didn't answer. The silence stretched, broken only by the ticking clock. Then she added, "You ever try not working for a day?" Alexander raised an eyebrow. "That would be irresponsible." Riley smiled faintly. "No, that would be human." Her words lingered in the air like a whisper he couldn't ignore. He looked up at her. She stood there, strong but gentle, her reflection glowing in the glass. Something about her calmness made his walls feel thinner. Later that day, during a security briefing, she placed her tablet on his desk. "You should check this report," she said. "It's not about numbers. It's about people." "Your people?" He frowned. "What about them?" "They're afraid of you," she said simply. He looked at her sharply. "They respect me." "They respect your power," Riley replied softly. "Not your heart." Alexander leaned back, his tone defensive. "A company runs on efficiency, not emotions." She smiled sadly. "Maybe that's why everyone looks so tired here." He said nothing, but her words cut deeper than he expected. He turned his gaze toward the window, but for the first time, the city view didn't comfort him. It looked lonely. Riley stepped closer, her voice gentle. "You've built walls so high, Mr. Reed, even light struggles to get in." He wanted to argue, to remind her that she was here to protect him, not lecture him. But when he looked at those calm eyes, that quiet warmth, his anger melted before it could rise. Instead, he whispered, "Maybe light doesn't belong here." She tilted her head. "Then maybe I'll just keep opening the windows until it does." He didn't reply, but his chest tightened in a way that felt unfamiliar and strangely human. That evening, the city fell under a soft rain. The sound of droplets against the glass filled the room like music. Alexander stayed late, reading files, pretending not to notice that Riley was still there. Sitting near the window with a cup of coffee in hand, "You should go home," he said without looking up. "I will," she replied, staring at the rain. "When it stops." He glanced at her reflection, the soft curve of her smile, the quiet peace on her face. She looked so alive, so free, and yet so steady. He set his pen down. "You're not afraid of silence, are you?" Riley shook her head. "No. Silence says more than most people ever do." Her voice carried a strange comfort. For a man who lived surrounded by silence, her presence made it feel less empty. After a long pause, she spoke again. "You know, I've met people like you before." He looked at her, curious. "People like me?" "People who think being strong means being alone." His eyes softened. "And what do you think it means?" She turned to him, meeting his gaze. "Being strong means caring, even when it hurts." Her words settled deep inside him. The rain outside grew louder, a steady rhythm against the glass. He didn't realize when he stood up or why he walked closer to her, but suddenly he was beside her. Looking out at the rain-slick city, the silence between them was filled with warmth, gentle. Heavy, unspoken. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Riley whispered, "The city looks softer in the rain, doesn't it?" Alexander nodded slowly. "Yes. It does." Her reflection in the glass was right next to his. So close, yet still separated by invisible distance. She turned slightly, her voice playful now. "Don't tell me the Ice King likes rain." He gave a quiet smile. "Maybe I do." Riley laughed softly, and he felt something stir inside his chest. It wasn't control or logic, it was something alive. Something he thought he had buried long ago when she finally stood. "Stretching," she said. "You should rest, Mr. Reed. Even ice needs time to melt." He looked at her, unsure if she was teasing or saying something more. But before he could answer, she was already at the door, her boots echoing softly against the floor. "Good night, Riley," he said quietly. She paused and looked back, smiling. "Good night, Alexander." It was the first time she said his name, not sir, not boss, not Mr. Reed. Just Alexander. The sound of it felt different, real. When she left, the rain continued its slow dance on the windows. The city lights shimmered through the drops, painting patterns across his reflection. He stood there, watching the empty doorway. Feeling the echo of her voice in his heart, he didn't understand it yet, but something inside him was changing. Her laughter still lingered in the air. Her warmth still touched his cold world. And as he whispered to himself, barely audible, "She's different," the clock ticked softly behind him steady. SLOW, like a heartbeat waking after a long, frozen sleep. Night had fallen early that Thursday, painting the glass walls of Reed Enterprises in deep shades of blue. The city outside buzzed with quiet energy horns in the distance. Soft rain tapping the streets but inside Alexander's office. Only the hum of his computer and the faint clinking of his pen filled the air. He had stayed late again. Though this time, it wasn't only work keeping him there. Every so often, his eyes wandered to the door, expecting the sound of footsteps. Riley Hart never clocked out on time. She always stayed nearby, pretending to check security feeds or paperwork. But Alexander knew she simply didn't like leaving him alone in the silent tower at WAS. Exactly 10:17 p.m. She entered, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "Still here, boss?" He looked up, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "And you're still calling me that?" "Well, you haven't fired me yet," she replied with a grin, setting 1 cup on his desk. "You should try this. It's not that bitter stuff you usually drink." He eyed it suspiciously, but took a sip anyway. The warmth spread through him slowly, just like her presence always did. "Too sweet," he murmured, but his expression softened. Riley leaned on the edge of his desk, watching him. "You should go home, Alexander." "It's raining again?" He glanced at the window. The city lights were blurred by raindrops. "I like the rain," he said quietly. "It hides the noise." She tilted her head. "Or maybe you just like what it makes you feel." He looked at her for a long moment. Her tone was soft, but her eyes held something deep, something that saw past his walls. He wanted to speak, to ask her what she meant. But the sudden crackle of her earpiece broke the moment. Her expression changed instantly. Security breach. South entrance. 2 unidentified. Before Alexander could react, she was already moving swift, focused, her hand resting near the small sidearm under her jacket. "Stay here," she ordered firmly, her voice calm but sharp. He stood. "Riley, I'm not staying," she turned, her eyes fierce for the first time he'd ever seen. "Alexander, please. Let me do my job." Her tone left no room for argument. He froze. She disappeared through the door, her boots echoing down the hallway. The office fell silent again, except for the low hum of the rain and the faint buzz of city life far below. For the first time in years, Alexander felt something he hadn't felt since childhood fear. Not for himself, but for her. He moved to the glass wall, trying to see down through the layers of reflection and light, but the darkness outside was thick. A few tense minutes passed. Then a gunshot. His heart jumped. Riley. He rushed toward the door, but before he reached it, another sound came, a faint thud, followed by hurried footsteps. Then silence. He stood frozen, his pulse racing. Seconds felt like hours. Then the door burst open and Riley stumbled in, her hand pressed to her arm, blood staining her sleeve. "Riley." He ran to her, grabbing her shoulders. "You're hurt." She shook her head quickly, breathless. "Just a graze. They're gone. Security handled it." He guided her to the couch, ignoring her protests. "Sit down," he said firmly. She tried to smile. "Bossy." He tore a strip from his white handkerchief and wrapped it gently around her arm. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was calm. "You could have been killed." She looked up at him, her eyes tired but shining. "That's part of the job, remember?" "Not like this," he whispered. "Not for me." The room was quiet except for the soft rain. His fingers brushed against hers as he tied the bandage. For a moment, they both froze, the air thick with something that had no name. Then Riley spoke softly, her voice shaking just a little. "You shouldn't look at me like that, Alexander." "Like what?" "Like I'm something fragile," she whispered. "I'm not." He met her gaze. "You're not. But that doesn't mean I want to see you hurt." Their eyes held for a long moment. The city lights outside flickered, painting them in gold and shadow. The hum of the air conditioner blended with the rhythm of the rain. And somewhere between those quiet sounds, their hearts seemed to find the same beat. Finally, Riley broke the silence with a soft laugh. "You're full of surprises. You know that?" Cold CEO turns gentle nurse. He smiled faintly. "Don't tell anyone? It'll ruin my reputation." She laughed again, the sound warm and soft. Then, with a sigh, she leaned back on the couch, closing her eyes. "I think I'll just sit here a minute." He watched her quietly. The strong, carefree woman who teased him daily now looked peaceful, almost vulnerable. He didn't realize his hand was still resting on hers until she whispered, eyes half open, "You can let go now." Heedy and single quotes. "T, instead," he said softly, "you saved me tonight." Her lips curved into a sleepy smile. "That's my job, remember?" He nodded. "No, you did more than that." Her eyes met his again, a flicker of emotion crossing between them, something dangerous. Something real. The rain outside softened to a whisper. The clock ticked slowly, like a heartbeat in the quiet. For the first time, Alexander didn't want the night to end. He wanted this silence, their silence, to last forever. Riley opened her eyes fully and whispered, "You should rest, Alexander." He gave a faint smile. "Only if you do too." She smiled back, her voice light again. "Deal." They sat there together, surrounded by the soft sounds of the rain, the hum of the night, and a warmth that neither of them dared to name. Outside, the storm faded. Inside, a different kind of storm began, gentle, silent, and full of unspoken feelings neither could hide anymore. And as Riley finally drifted to sleep, her head resting lightly against the couch, Alexander whispered into the dim air, almost afraid of his own voice, "You're my shield. But you've become my weakness." The rain fell slower. The city lights shimmered faintly. And in the cold glass office, for the first time in his life, the Ice King felt human. Morning sunlight crept through the glass walls, spilling warmth across the once cold office of Alexander Reed. Papers were still scattered on his desk, untouched since the night before. The faint scent of coffee lingered in the air, mixed with something softer like rain and memory. Riley Hart was already there. Her arm was wrapped in a fresh bandage, her expression calm, her body language as confident as ever. She stood near the window, watching the city wake. Alexander had arrived early too, though neither had said much since. Their words seemed trapped between what was professional and what was personal. "Good morning," he said finally. His voice was even, but his eyes searched hers. Riley turned, smiling slightly. "Morning, boss." He frowned faintly. "Still calling me that?" She grinned. "Would you rather I call you Alex?" Doesn't sound very CEO-like. He allowed himself a quiet chuckle, barely there, but real. Maybe not. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, surrounded by sunlight and silence. The air between them was warm, but uncertain, like a song that hadn't found its final note. By noon, Alexander tried to return to his usual rhythm meetings. Numbers, deadlines, but something inside him kept wandering. Every time Riley walked past, every time her voice came through his earpiece, checking in on the security floor, He felt that same strange pull in his chest. When she wasn't around, he found himself listening for her footsteps, and when she was around, he pretended not to notice, but pretending became harder each day. That afternoon, a board meeting dragged on for hours. His director spoke in circles, arguing about image, profit, and numbers. Riley stood near the corner of the room, silent but observant, her sharp eyes tracking every gesture. At one point, Alexander's gaze caught hers, just for a second. But that second stretched into something endless. She gave the slightest smile, small, but enough to remind him that someone in the room saw him, not the title he carried. When the meeting ended, he walked out quickly, the usual calm mask back on his face. Riley followed, her tone light. Rough crowd. He smirked faintly. You could say that. She glanced at him sideways. You looked bored. Want me to stage a fake emergency next time? He actually laughed. Don't tempt me. The sound of his laughter surprised them both. It echoed softly through the hallway, lighter than anything that had lived in that building before. Later that evening, as most employees left, Riley sat by the window, cleaning her small pocket knife while Alexander worked quietly. The city below was painted in orange light. Do you ever stop working? She asked. He didn't look up. Do you ever stop talking? She smiled. Touché. Silence again, but not cold. Comfortable, familiar. After a moment, she spoke softly. You know, I used to think men like you were impossible to reach. All rules. No heart. But I was wrong. He finally looked up, curious. Was I really that bad? She tilted her head. You were. Distant. Like someone who lived behind glass. He thought for a moment, then replied, maybe glass was safer. Riley's eyes softened. Safe doesn't mean happy, Alexander. He looked at her, the words sinking deep. And what do you think happiness looks like? She smiled faintly. Something that doesn't follow rules. Her tone was teasing, but her eyes told another story. Something tender. Something she shouldn't say aloud. He leaned back, the corners of his lips curving slightly. You're dangerous, Miss Hart. Only if you're afraid of feeling something, she said quietly. Their eyes locked again. For a heartbeat, the world outside disappeared, the city lights, the hum of the night, everything. It was just them. Then she looked away, pretending to check her wrist communicator. Anyway, your security system's been updated. No intruders tonight. He smiled faintly. Except one. She raised a brow. Oh, who's that? He hesitated, his voice low. You. The silence that followed was electric. She didn't answer. Didn't need to. The sound of her soft breath filled the room. Finally, she laughed softly, breaking the tension. Careful, Mr. Reed. People might think the Ice King's melting. He stood and walked toward the window, watching the night sky reflect on the glass. Maybe he already has. Her smile faded into something quiet, uncertain. The air between them changed thicker, heavier, but not uncomfortable. It was full of things neither dared to name. Later, when she gathered her things to leave, Alexander stopped her. Riley? She turned, her expression calm, but her heartbeat visible in her throat. He stepped closer, not too close. Just enough for his voice to drop. You should take tomorrow off. Rest. You've done enough. She shook her head gently. If I rest, who's going to protect you? He smiled faintly. You seem to forget I wasn't looking for protection anymore. Her breath caught. Then what are you looking for? He met her eyes, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. Maybe I'm trying to find out. Neither of them moved. Neither blinked. The silence was alive, full of everything unspoken. Then, slowly, Riley smiled softly, almost sadly. Be careful, Alexander. Feelings have rules too. Break them, and someone always gets hurt. He nodded, his voice calm. Then maybe it's time I stop following rules. Her gaze lingered a moment longer. Then she turned toward the door. Good night, Alexander. Good night. Riley, when she left. The office felt different, again not empty, not lonely, but charged with something dangerous and sweet. He stood by the window for a long while, watching the city's lights blink like small promises in the dark. His reflection stared back at him, no longer the Ice King, no longer untouchable, and somewhere deep inside, he knew the truth. This wasn't just about duty anymore, it was about her. The line between rules and feelings had begun to blur for the first time in his perfect, structured life. Alexander Reed didn't want to draw it again. The night sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that promised rain long before it began. From his glass office, high above the city, Alexander Reed stood staring out, hands in his pockets, eyes unfocused. Below, the city lights shimmered like fallen stars, but even their glow couldn't quiet the storm inside him. For the first time in years, work didn't hold his attention. The numbers on his screen blurred into meaningless lines. His mind kept drifting to her voice, her smile. The way she leaned against his desk with careless confidence. Riley Hart had changed everything. She had walked into his cold world and brought warmth where there had only been silence. But now that warmth scared him more than loneliness ever had, because he knew. What he felt for her crossed every rule he'd ever lived by. And yet, he couldn't stop it. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Without turning, Alexander knew who it was, still working late. Riley's voice carried a hint of laughter, though her eyes, when he turned to meet them, were softer than usual. He smiled faintly. You make it sound like a crime. She stepped closer, her tone teasing. It is as if you haven't eaten dinner yet. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. You sound like Martha. Except I don't nag, she replied, leaning on the edge of his desk. I suggest nicely. There it was, again, that casual warmth, that effortless charm that slipped past all his defenses. He walked toward her, his voice quieter now. You should be home, Riley. She shrugged. And leave you alone in your glass castle. Not a chance. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city below filled the silence like a heartbeat. Then, faint thunder rolled in the distance. A flash of light illuminated her face, the shadows of rain clouds painting her eyes in shades of silver. Alexander finally said, Do you ever regret taking this job? She looked surprised. Why would I? He hesitated. It's dangerous. And lately? Complicated. Riley smiled faintly. You mean because you've stopped being scary? He gave a quiet laugh. Something like that. Her expression softened. I don't regret it, Alexander. Not for a second. His name on her lips, soft, personal, unguarded, did something to him. Something dangerous before he could speak again. The sound of rain began a gentle patter against the glass, growing heavier with each second. The lights outside blurred, the city melting into reflections. Riley walked closer to the window. It's really coming down, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He joined her, standing beside her so close he could feel her warmth. They both watched the rain slide down the glass, tracing trails like tears. Strange, she murmured. Rain always feels honest to me. He looked at her. Honest. She nodded. Yeah, it hides nothing. You can cry, and no one will know. You can wash everything away and start over. Her words hit something deep inside him. He turned slightly, his voice low. What if some things shouldn't be washed away? She looked up at him, then really looked. And in that instant, the walls he'd built for years began to crumble. The rain drummed louder, echoing in the silence between them. Riley. His voice trembled, unsure, but filled with something real. You've made me question everything I believed in. She blinked. That sounds like a complaint. It's not, he said quickly. It's a confession. Her breath caught. Alexander. He stepped closer. You walked into my world like it belonged to you. You talk too much. You smile too easily. And you make chaos where I lived by order. And still. He stopped, his eyes searching hers. I can't imagine this place without you anymore. The words hung in the air like thunder waiting to fall. Riley's lips parted, her voice trembling just slightly. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? He whispered. Because I might believe you. The rain poured harder now, the sound surrounding them completely. He took another step closer. Then believe me. Her eyes shimmered, uncertain. Alexander, this isn't right. You're my boss. I'm supposed to protect you. Not maybe you already have, he interrupted softly. Not from danger. From myself. For a moment, neither of them breathed. The storm outside roared, lightning flashing against the glass. In its light, their faces were inches apart. Then she whispered, You know what happens next, right? He smiled faintly. You tell me. She looked at him for one long, trembling heartbeat. Then turned away, running a hand through her hair. We can't, Alexander. Not this. He exhaled, the sound almost lost in the rain. I know. But he didn't move. And neither did she. The air was alive with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Riley spoke, her voice low and raw. You make it hard to follow the rules. He smiled sadly. You make it hard to care about them. She laughed softly, shaking her head. You're impossible. Maybe, he said, his voice tender now. But only with you. Another flash of lightning lit the room. For a moment, their reflections appeared side by side in the glass too. People trapped between duty and desire. When the thunder rolled again. Riley whispered, Promise me something. Anything, no matter what happens. Don't lose this version of yourself. The one who smiles. He nodded slowly. Only if you promise to stay long enough to see it. She hesitated, then gave a quiet smile. You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Reed. He smiled too, though there was a sadness behind it. It's the only kind I know. The rain eased to a drizzle. The storm slowly fading. They stood there for a long while, two souls caught between rules and hearts. Pretending the quiet meant safety when it only meant pause. And as Riley finally turned to leave, her reflection lingered beside his in the glass proof that some feelings, once spoken, can't be taken back. When the door closed behind her, Alexander whispered into the empty room, You broke every rule I ever made, and I don't want to fix a single one. The rain slowed, the city sighed, and the Ice King realized love had already won. The days after the rain felt different, softer, slower, and filled with a quiet tension that neither Alexander Reed nor Riley Hart could ignore. Nothing had been said outright, yet everything had changed. The air between them carried an invisible pulse, like the moment before a storm, where silence hums with unspoken truth. At the office, they acted as if nothing had happened. Meetings continued. Reports were signed, and the same clock ticked steadily on the wall. But behind every glance, every word, was something more, a heartbeat that neither of them could silence. Riley tried to keep things professional. She still stood by his door, still scanned the halls, still joked about his seriousness. But sometimes her laughter would falter mid-sentence when she caught his eyes on her. And he who had spent years hiding emotion was beginning to forget how to hide at all one morning. Alexander arrived early to find Riley already in the lobby, training the new security recruits. She moved with quiet authority, her voice confident, her expression calm. He watched from a distance, unseen, and for a moment forgot everything else aboard. The business, the world. When she finished, he clapped softly. She turned, startled. "You're watching me now? That's new." He smiled faintly. "You're good at what you do." "I know," she said with a playful grin. "But I didn't think CEOs had time for compliments." He walked closer. "Maybe this one's learning." Her eyes softened at that. And something inside her trembled. The kind of fear that only comes when the heart begins to believe what it shouldn't. By midday, the city was quiet, the sun filtering through thin clouds. In his office, Alexander worked silently while Riley stood near the window, arms crossed, pretending to check her communicator. "Why do you always stand instead of sitting?" he asked without looking up. She shrugged. "Easier to move if something happens." He smiled slightly. "Something's always happening." She turned, tilting her head. "Are you talking about work? Or something else?" Their eyes met. The air thickened with meaning. Alexander set his pen down. "Maybe both." Riley's heartbeat quickened. "You really don't like rules, do you?" He stood and walked toward her slowly. "I used to live by them, and now?" She whispered. "Now," he said softly, "I want to live." Her breath caught. "You don't mean that." "I do," he said simply. "I mean everything I've said since the rain." The silence that followed was full of warmth, beautiful warmth. Riley turned away, staring out the window. "You're making this harder than it already is." He stepped closer, his voice low, careful. "I'm not asking for promises, Riley. I just want to stop pretending." She turned toward him, and the look in her eyes could have stopped time. "You know what happens if people find out?" she said quietly. "The company, the board, they'll use it against you." He smiled sadly. "Let them try." Her lips curved in a trembling smile. "You really are impossible, and you really make me want to be," he said. The following week, something in their routine shifted. Riley started arriving a little earlier. Alexander began taking his lunch on the balcony instead of his desk. Sometimes they'd share quiet moments with coffee, not speaking, just watching the city below. Other times, they'd exchange glances across crowded rooms, small, secret looks that said everything words couldn't. At night, when most of the building had emptied, she'd linger by his door before leaving. He'd look up from his desk, their eyes meeting through the glass. Neither waved. Neither spoke. But both understood it wasn't about confession anymore. It was about connection. Their bond existed in silences. In stolen seconds between duty and desire. One evening, after a long day, the elevator stopped unexpectedly between floors. The lights flickered once, then stabilized. Riley sighed, pressing the emergency button. Of course. Perfect timing. Alexander smiled faintly. "You're the security expert. Should I be worried?" "Only if I decide to keep you trapped," she teased. He leaned against the elevator wall, watching her. "Would you?" She laughed softly, but the sound faded when she met his gaze. The small space between them suddenly felt smaller. Her voice dropped. "You really shouldn't look at me like that." He took a slow breath. "Then stop being someone worth looking at." Her heart skipped. "That's not fair." "Neither is how I feel," he whispered. The elevator hummed, quiet and still. Outside, the world carried on, but inside that narrow box of light and metal, something fragile bloomed. They didn't move closer. But the air felt charged, as if one step could change everything. Finally, Riley broke the silence, her tone soft but trembling. "If you keep this up, I won't be able to walk away." He answered without hesitation. "Then don't." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, the moment breaking like glass. They stepped out, the hallway lights reflecting their faces, calm on the surface. Storming within, that night, long after everyone left, Alexander sat alone in his office. Rain had returned, faint and rhythmic, painting silver streaks across the glass. He thought of her voice, her strength, her laughter, and how all of it had changed him. He no longer saw the world as walls of glass and silence. Now it was a mosaic of feeling, full of color, fragile and alive. He heard soft footsteps behind him. Still here. He turned. Riley stood at the doorway, drenched from the rain, her hair damp, her jacket clinging to her shoulders. "You forgot your umbrella," she said, holding one out. He smiled. "Or maybe I knew you'd bring it." Her lips curved faintly. "You always have an answer." He stepped forward, his voice quiet but sure. "Only when it comes to you." The room fell still. The rain softened. Her reflection shimmered beside his on the glass wall. Neither spoke again. They didn't need to, because somewhere between rules and reality, they had already chosen their truth. A truth without rules. A love that existed quietly. Like rain sliding down glass, beautiful, fleeting, but impossibly real. The city woke under a quiet sky. Morning light filtered through soft clouds, brushing against the tall glass walls of Reed Enterprises. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind the scent of wet pavement and something bittersweet in the air, like the calm after an unspoken storm. Inside his office, Alexander Reed stood by the window, watching droplets slide slowly down the glass. The world outside moved as always, cars, people, noise, but his heart felt suspended. As if caught between two beats, Riley's heart was leaving today. He'd known for a week. Her contract had ended, and though he could have easily extended it, she hadn't asked, and he hadn't offered. They both understood without words. Some connections weren't meant to be kept by paper or position. They lived in moments, not signatures. Still, the thought of her walking out of his life left a quiet ache in his chest. The sound of footsteps broke the silence. He didn't need to turn around. He knew that rhythm by heart, now steady, confident. A little too casual for someone who had saved his life once. "Good morning," she said softly. He turned. She was standing in the doorway, dressed simply as always, jeans, jacket, a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Morning," he said. Trying to sound calm, she glanced around the office, her gaze lingering on the glass walls, the desk, the faint reflection of her own face beside his. "You ever get tired of all this?" she asked. He frowned lightly. "Of what?" "The glass, the silence, the distance." He looked out at the skyline. "Maybe," he said after a pause. "But I got used to it." She stepped closer. "No one should ever get used to loneliness, Alexander." He met her eyes, and the words he'd been holding in all week pressed against his throat. "Don't go. Stay. We haven't finished this story yet." But what came out instead was only, "When's your flight?" "Tonight," she said quietly. He nodded once, hiding the tremor in his chest. "You're heading back to Boston?" "Yeah," she said, smiling faintly. "My brother's still there. Said I need a normal job, whatever that means." Alexander looked at her for a long time, memorizing her eyes, her calm strength, the warmth that somehow survived in her no matter how cold the world was. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that could hold her here a little longer. But all he managed was, "I'll miss your coffee." She chuckled softly. "Liar, you hated it," he admitted, smiling faintly. "But I liked the reason it showed up on my desk." That made her pause. For a moment, the air felt fragile, like one wrong word could shatter it completely. She broke the silence first. "You're different now, you know?" "How so?" "When I first met you, you were made of ice. Now?" She shrugged. "You're human again?" He exhaled slowly. "You did that." Her smile faltered. "Then my job here's done." He shook his head, stepping closer. No, you don't just fix people and leave, Riley. She looked up at him, her eyes suddenly glossy under the morning light. Sometimes you have to. That's how they stay fixed. The words hit harder than he expected. He turned away, walking toward the window, his voice low. Is this really what you want? She hesitated. It's what's right. He looked back at her. Since when do you care about rules? A sad smile touched her lips. Since I met someone who made breaking them too hard, my eyes locked again, and for a long time, neither moved. The hum of the city below faded into silence. Then Riley whispered, "Say something before I change my mind." He took a slow breath. You once told me that happiness doesn't follow rules. I did, she said softly. Then why are you walking away from the only thing that ever made me happy? Her lips parted, but no words came. Only the sound of her breath and the faint ticking of the clock between them. Finally, she stepped closer, just enough to feel the warmth of his presence. Because if I stay, we'll stop being who we are. You'll forget your purpose. I'll forget mine. And everything we built, everything you become middle, fall apart. He reached out slowly, his hand almost touching hers. Maybe I'm okay with that. Her eyes glistened. I'm not. The honesty in her voice broke him in a way nothing ever had. He looked down, a faint smile trembling on his lips. You're stronger than me. Riley's voice softened. No, Alexander. I'm just scared in a different way. They stood there in silence close, but not close enough. Then she whispered, Can I ask you something? He nodded. If we'd met somewhere else, no company, no rules, would you still have fallen for me? He didn't even hesitate. I wouldn't have had a choice. Her eyes closed briefly, tears threatening. When she opened them again, her voice was barely a whisper. Then that's enough for me. She reached out and placed something on his desk, a small silver keychain shaped like a shield. For luck, she said quietly. So you remember the bodyguard who kept you safe? He stared at it, then back at her. Who's going to keep me safe now? She smiled faintly through the tears she refused to let fall. Maybe you finally learned how to do that yourself. Outside, a car horn sounded softly. She turned toward the door. Riley, he said quickly. She stopped, looking back one last time. His voice was low, breaking. If you ever need a place that feels like home, you know where I'll be. She smiled. Real one this time, full of warmth and pain and love. Don't tempt me, Mr. Reed. And then she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her softly. Almost kindly, but the sound echoed louder than any silence he had ever known. Hours passed, but Alexander didn't move. The sunlight shifted, the city dimmed, and the office grew quiet again. He sat by the window, the silver keychain glinting beside him. Outside, the clouds cleared. The last of the rainwater sparkled on the glass, like tiny reminders of everything he'd felt but never said. He whispered into the stillness, his voice barely audible. Goodbye, Riley. And though the door was closed, her laughter still lived in the air, her warmth in the light, her memory in every heartbeat he had left. Because some people don't stay forever. They just stay enough to change who you are. And as the night settled gently around him, Alexander Reed finally smiled. Not the cold smile of a CEO, but the quiet, human smile of a man who had finally learned how to feel.